All right, so for another round of some simple videos, kind of going off the last video. If you haven't watched it, check out my YouTube channel. It's on there. So right now the car is lifted up on jacks and has no jack stands underneath it, so it is literally balancing in the air. But what I wanted to show you is just a quick trick to being able to get the car, you know, like I showed you when I was jacking it up. If you don't have two low profile jacks, getting your jack out of the front can be quite difficult. So here's kind of a quick, easy little hack. You know, the biggest thing to remember is, especially for those of you who maybe are like a couple that have reached out to me already, learning how to wrench on a car for the first time with the Rush. It's not always like it is on TV when you watch these TV shows. Anybody who wrenched for a living or who owns a shop, who has worked a lot in a shop, knows that sometimes you just do it anyway. You can do it to get it done. So what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to set the camera up here and we'll go from there. So I'm going to start with the back. Now I've brought the jack up because when I bring this jack down, okay, I'm not going to be able to get the jack out. The front of the car's on it. So I take my second jack. Voila. And just like that, it's on the ground. Not too much to it, quite simple. And now when I was at Mid-Ohio, believe it or not, I've not made any chassis adjustments to the car since Rush sent it to me. I completely disassembled the car over the winter, completely rebuilt all the suspension, sent the shocks back to Texas, had them rebuilt, got them back, but I precisely measured everything on the car and put it back to exactly the way that everything was when I first picked the car up in Texas, when it was new. And my goal was just take it back out to my local track, Carolina Motorsports Park, run the car, and have a successful, you know, day or weekend with the car feeling like it did before I took it apart. And it was a success. It was perfect. My ride height ended up being exactly where it was. My camber, my toe, everything was exactly where it was. So all that was great. When I was at Mid-Ohio and sitting at the table very late at night and a few beers in with some of the guys, like David Hosey and Blair, for instance, you know, they were kind of shocked that the car had the pace that it had in it on their factory setup. It really is a great driving car on their factory setup. I would not recommend new owners going and making adjustments right away. Go learn the car, go figure it out. It's set up very safe. It's set up to push on corner entry. It's set up to keep the rear end of the car behind you and not hanging out, so you're constantly having to catch it. But as you get more comfortable in the car, there are adjustments you're going to want to make. And there's tons of guys that are in the Rush community that have made adjustments and could definitely give you some feedback and some advice on some adjustments. So I was given some advice that night to make some adjustments. So that was after day one. So day two at Mid-Ohio, I made a sway bar adjustment in the morning, and then after qualifying, I ended up making some camber adjustments, and everything was just on the fly. I was just pulling shims out and just going with it. And you know, the car felt great. I got better turn in. I mean, I definitely gained some pace. I think I gained a second by the end of day two, which obviously was still a new track to me, so I was still learning the track, and so there's lots of reasons for that. Not all of it was just alignment changes, but now I need to actually measure and see where all these settings are at, and get them to where they're uniform or the same based on those numbers that were given to me. And so I'm going to set up everything on the car now, and I know Rush already made a video showing you how to do alignment adjustments, but I'll kind of run back through it for those of you who maybe haven't seen that video, or you know, maybe I'll touch on points they didn't, which I don't think so. I think they did a pretty good job. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna do the toe and the camber measurements and everything. Now I do have to put my tires on for my camber gauge. It goes on the wheel. You know, for some maybe who do this a lot, have those fancier hub mounted assemblies. That's something that I definitely want to do. My shop floor is pretty level right here, so it's good enough. I do have a setup jig that I could put it on, but unless I'm scaling and balancing the car out scales wise, I just don't, you know, bother with setting that jig up. Once I get the shop a little more decluttered, I plan on having that jig set up on a permanent basis, but for now it's just stacked up in the corner, and every time I set it up I got to laser level it and, you know, level all the pads, and it's quite a task. So but yeah, so when I come back, I'm gonna have the tow bars on the car, and we'll see about making some camber adjustments, and I'm sure that I'm gonna have to jack it up and take some tires off, and I still have to replace those upper control arm bolts that we talked about in the last video, because I know that I dropped some tires and smacked some curbs pretty hard at Mid-Ohio. But yeah, so be right back. Alright, so first things first, before we get started, I've got my camber gauge already set up and zeroed and ready to go. I brought the car off the jack stands. When the car first gets on the ground, you can't just go ahead and start measuring for alignment, because your tires have not returned to their natural resting place like they would be if you were getting ready to take the car out on track and you've driven it around or loaded it on the trailer and back. So what you need to do is you need to roll the car around, forward, backward, turn the wheel, you know, shake the suspension. You want to make sure that everything gets back to where it's flowing naturally and not bound up because you just set the car on the ground, okay? So I've already done that. I've rolled it back and forwards in my little space I have here in the shop right now. And I've already went around and taken my first preliminary camber measurements. So remember, we need to do camber before we do tow. Always camber before tow. Tow is the last thing that you're gonna do, okay? So I've already got the camber gauge set up. Again, I've already went around and measured it, wrote down my numbers up there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this long acre AccuLevel camber gauge, okay, and you can get any one you want. There's a bunch of different models and designs of these things from different companies, okay? But we're gonna set it up. These little studs sit on the resting surface of the wheel, and then there's a little bubble gauge right here we wanna rotate, and we wanna get that bubble gauge so it's telling me that this thing is straight up and down. Okay, now right now it's showing me that I have negative 2.5 degrees. Now believe it or not, I did this on the fly in the paddock at Mid-Ohio. That's exactly where I want it to be. Okay, so now I've also went around and measured, and I'm at negative 1.8, negative 1.5, and negative 2.1. So I've got to add a little bit more negative to that one, and I've got to take a little negative away from this one because my target on the back is 1.5. So I want to run 1.5 and 2.5. Now I believe these were the numbers that I got from David Hosey and Blair, and maybe I'm giving away their secrets, but their back number might have been 1.6 or something maybe, but I like 0.5s, and I don't think at my skill level I'm going to notice a 0.1 degree difference anyway. So I'm going to go with 2.5 and 1.5, and I'm going to try it there. After I get that set, then I can go ahead and start adjusting the tow, and I'll walk y'all through that as well. So first things first, I need to jack up the back and do the back one. And so once we get there, we will get started on that, and I will walk you through how we do it. Okay, so I'm back here. I'm taking the wheel off. I've jacked up the back of the car. I don't think that I need to show you all that. I've got a kitty cat here that says hello. So when you probably got your car, maybe if they gave you some stuff, you got some shims, little ones for the back, big longer ones for the front, okay? Now I've got all different thicknesses here, and I was going to get super technical and measure them, and so we can measure how much change I actually got. However, I just pulled out my micrometer, and the battery is dead, and I don't have another battery, but I'm going to move on with the video anyway. So what I've done is I've compared the thicknesses, and I'm going to put these two little tiny thin guys in. I don't want to put the next bigger one in because I think it's going to be maybe a little too much. So I'm going to put these two in. Now, when it comes to breaking the bolts loose, you've probably maybe seen, if you've been around the community, all these bad boys right here. A must buy if you're going to work on your own car, a Rush, okay? These things are fantastic. This is the biggest one, 8mm. That is what your upper control arm bolts are going to be. I've already been in here and broke them loose, so that way you guys didn't have to see me struggle. All right, and then the next tool that is absolutely a lifesaver that I just recently picked up, actually. I'm a DeWalt guy, so mine's DeWalt, but one of these bad boys is amazing. I know that Michael Schneider uses one. I don't remember what company his was, but I pretty much have everything DeWalt in my shop, and so all my drills and impacts and everything are all DeWalt, so I bought a DeWalt one. What I will say though is always make sure everything Allen on this car, break loose by hand, tighten up by hand. I don't know how many times I've had to call Blair or go online and order replacement bolts because I got carried away and was in a hurry and stripped them out. The latest one, the little drain on the air compressor, which I'll make another video about to show y'all how to do that. So I've already broke them loose. I'm simply just going to stick this in here and I'm going to run these bolts out. Now usually I've got brand new bolts. Usually when I replace these bolts, I'll just pull one out, put fresh Loctite on it, put it in, take the other one out. That way you're not actually pulling this assembly apart. But because I'm going to change the shims, and sometimes they can be a little bit of a bugger to get this thing opened up enough to get the shims in and out, for the sake of it, I'm going to try to loosen it up and do it without taking them both out. But if it doesn't work, I'm just going to take them both out. Run them out pretty far, but not all the way. Okay, now we should be able to just pull this thing forward. You'll see a lot of times it just doesn't want to go because these bolts might already be bent, hence why we're replacing them, okay? And so it doesn't want to slide forward. What'll happen is, and I'll pull it up here, is what'll happen is this should just want to give away, but as you can see, it quite doesn't want to give, and it's hard to get the shims out when it's underneath your upper control arm. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take both bolts out, all right, and then that way the whole upright can just hang. Now the theory of what I'm doing here, to think about this, is right now I'm sitting with negative 1.8 degrees on this side, and I want to back it down to negative 1.5. Okay, so now if I took a shim out of there, this center line here is not going to change. This is fastened to the chassis, okay? So this center line is not going to change. If I take a shim out and I tighten these bolts back up, it's going to pull the top of the upright further in, creating more negative camber. That's not what I want. What I want is to reduce the negative camber just a little bit. So that's why I've chosen to put these two tiny little shims in, because at the very least, it should move me 0.2, hopefully, and get me to negative 1.6. And that's close enough for me. I don't need to be exactly 1.5 with the other side. I'm never going to notice that 0.1 driving the car, and as long as the tires are wearing good, it's going to be fine. So I'm going to go with the 2 instead of just going with 1, and I don't want to go with a thicker one because I don't want to take it to 1.3 or whatever. So I'm going to set it back down. You guys can watch me do it. All right, so hopefully that is looking at me good enough. So I'm going to go ahead, and these bolts are still pretty tight because, again, I'm betting they're bent. There's one. I can see the whole thing just gave way a little bit. It's hard to say if that's bent or not. Might be a little bit. But again, when these things break, they cost you a bunch of money and it's just not worth it. It looks like the shims are wanting to come out on me. So I'm going to try to take them out before I lose them. Now every time these bolts break, you lose all these shims. So I've already bought plenty of shims from Rush, hence why I have big packs of extras. So these are the ones that were in it. Now all I'm going to do is add my 2 to it. Okay, and that's going to create hopefully my 1.5 that I'm looking for. And I've already taken one bolt out. I still can't quite get the play that I'm looking for, so I'm going to go ahead and just take the second bolt out and let this thing flop. Okay. No big deal, everything's good. Second bolt, that one has definitely got a bend in it. Okay, it's definitely got a curve. Definitely has a curve in it. Okay, so all that is good. Before I put these new bolts in, I need to put fresh Loctite on them. Okay, so these are going to be blue Loctite. That's going to be your game on this. Remember, your basic rule when it comes to Loctite is if it's something that you are likely to take apart often, which these bolts you should be replacing at least every 2 weekends, I think. You're going to want to use blue. If it's something that's not going to come apart often, you could usually get away with using red, and on this car I would recommend it. There's a few bolts, and we'll make other videos that I use red on that, you know, maybe you're not supposed to, but I would rather be safe than sorry. So again, I'm going to stick these bolts back in. Now keep in mind your brake line needs to stay above those bolts, alright? That's where its resting place is. Put a little bit on there. Now it doesn't take a ton of Loctite to handle these, okay? So I'm going to put the second bolt in. Okay, now I can take my shims. And now you should put them in like this. Now there's a way it's designed to be able to fit on one and drop down on the other so that you don't have to take the bolts out in order to do this. But in my case, again, I think the bolts were bent. So most of the times when I'm adjusting these, I've had to do it like this. They usually will not just give for me. Now the tricky part is lining this whole bad boy back up. Okay, you want to be very careful The upright is aluminum, I believe, and so the threads will strip very easily if you do not get it good and lined up before you start threading it in. So I'm going to hopefully not drop any shims and get one bolt good and started. Now that one's got a thread and a half on it. One of my shims is wanting to walk away on me, so again, stick the long end down in, drop it. Okay, now I'm going to aim for this other one. Okay, now serious rule here, do not just go to jumping on these things with something power. You want to make sure that you have them threaded good, as I've already stripped an upright out. And had to fix the threads and then didn't trust it and ended up replacing it. So go ahead and run these things in by hand just a little bit. Make sure that you have it good, okay? You don't want to strip anything. Take your time. No rush. Well, I guess it is a rush. Kind of funny. But it seems like I'm good, okay? I'm going to just kind of test it. Everything seems to be good. My Loctite's on there. And I'm going to run these things in. A little bit on each one. Don't run one all the way in. Okay, as soon as this starts to tighten, I'm done. Now if it's a smaller bolt, now these are pretty big, 8mm. Okay, that's what this is, 8mm, these bolts. If you're dealing with something a smaller bolt, you're not going to want to run it tight with something like this, especially Allen. You will strip that thing out in a second, okay? But so new bolts are in, fresh Loctite's on. I'm going to take this. How tight do these things go? They go ooga tight, 2 oogas. So you're going to want to tighten them down good and tight, okay? Remember, lefty loosey, righty tighty. Okay. I'm going to make sure these things are really tight. And remember, I said on the last video, anytime you replace these, if you can, you want to go ahead and let them cure for 24 hours. Let the Loctite do its job. Okay. I would say those things are pretty tight. Now we have to put the tire back on, roll the car around, do the same thing we did in the very beginning in order to be able to test this one and see where we're at. So before I do that, I'm going to go to the front wheel and we're going to adjust that one together, and then I'll do it, and that way I'm only stopping and measuring once. So I'm going to put this tire back on, let the jack back down on the back. I'm going to jack up the front, go to the driver's front. We need to add 0.4 degrees to that one, and so we'll walk through it when I get up there. Shut my fan off that's up here, just so hopefully you can hear me better. So now on this one, I have negative 2.1 degrees. Okay, remember negative means the top of the tire is leaning in. Now I want to get to negative 2.5, so I need to get the top upright to lean in more. So now opposite of what we did in the rear, we needed to take some lean out. So that's why I needed to add a shim. So on the front, what we need to do is we need to remove a shim. So now here's the thing, I've only got 2 shims in here. I've got a thick one and a medium-sized one. Since I don't have my micrometer, I can't measure them to tell you the thicknesses of them, but one is significantly thicker than the other. Now the question is, if I take the one smaller one out, will it be too much? And my initial thought is it might be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my stack of shims here, and I think that I am going to take out that thicker one, and I think I'm going to put in one of these real thin guys just to give me a little bit back. Okay, so I'm just going to swap them out. I'm going to show you here. So you can see I've only got 2 here. So I'm going to take that little guy out. I'm going to swap it with this guy, and we're going to see if that gives me enough. I'm hoping that's going to be the money shot that I need in order to get this thing right on the first try, that I don't have to do it again, because that would be obviously what I don't want, is to have to do it again. So I've already broken the bolts loose again, so you don't have to watch me struggle. I'm going to back these out a little bit more. Now I'm hoping I don't have to take the bolts out. I'm not replacing these bolts. These bolts, I've not seen anybody break them yet. Hopefully I won't jinx myself. Okay. Now obviously we got some good lean out of this thing. So I'm going to try to finagle this one out. And we might need to go a little bit more. that should be enough to do it. All right, now remember, I'm gonna have to put some fresh Loctite on these bolts. So remember how I told you they're designed to slide in and slide out without you having to take the bolts out? Okay, so I've taken that one out. I'm gonna put my little guy in, same position that one was. Okay, now I'm going to slide these shims. I wanna make sure that I get my Loctite in a good spot. I'm gonna make sure these bolts aren't too gummed up already, and they look pretty good. I've not taken them out, maybe but just one time, I believe. Loctite, I'm just gonna go ahead and once it allows me to pump it. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put a small amount there. Okay, not too much. I probably do it too much, I'll show you, but essentially just putting a drop on them, let it run around them. That's probably significant enough, okay? Now I'm going to make sure that that's closed, because this stuff is not cheap. If you've bought it, I bought the off-brand this go around, and it seems to be working just fine. So you could find this on eBay or wherever. It's a whole lot cheaper than actual Loctite. And so now I'm going to run these bolts back in again, one at a time, little by little. Now, biggest thing I will say is while you're tightening them, make sure that they stay in. Sometimes they will back out a little bit, especially I've seen it happen more in the back. Okay, and now we're just gonna, these things again, just like the back ones, ooga ooga, 2 oogas. We're gonna really tighten them things down. Don't be shy, make sure that thing is tight. Alright, I'd rather them be a little too tight than not tight enough. I'm going to have to clean them and put fresh markers on. Same with in the back, I'm going to have to put fresh markers on. But at this point now, I'm ready to bolt the wheel back on and move the car around and take these measurements and see where I'm at. Hopefully I've got it right. Alright, so what I did is I went ahead off camera. I didn't figure I needed to show you guys how to remeasure the camber again. But I actually got this one was at 2.1. That small change got me to 2.4. So within 0.1 degree of 2.5 negative, of course, same as the other front. That's close enough for me. In the back, this one was already good. It was that side over there that I changed, the passenger rear, and we were at 1.8. I added those 2 thin little shims. It actually took me just a hair too far, and I went to 1.4, and I'm at 1.5 negative over here. But again, I'm within 0.1, so my changes were spot on in my opinion. I would not mess with that. I would bet that if I rolled this car around in here a little bit more and took another measurement, any one of these wheels could change by 0.1 in either direction. So when you get that close, you just call it. So now what I'm doing now is I've got the toe alignment bars on here. You might recognize what these look like. I've got the ones on the front and the one on the rear. These are made by Rush. If you're watching this video to learn how to do this, I would recommend you get these. If you're obviously experienced and have your own setup that's better than mine, then you might not need these bars. You might have a, now that I can't think of it, but anyway, you might have a hub style mount where you don't have to have the tires on, so you can make these adjustments without having to take the tires on and off. Obviously those are very, very nice, just a little bit more pricey, okay? So it just all depends on your budget and how far you're willing to go with it. So now what I have here is just some BG racing string. Now you could use any sort of string as long as the tensile allows you to get it taut. Alright, so you're just going to run it all the way back. Now I run it a little farther than I have to and wrap it around your little knot, your little groove right here. Go around and around and around a couple times. Okay, then you're going to want to cap that and you're just going to let it hang. You want to make sure that that is nice and taut. Okay? So if you couldn't hear me, you just want to make sure that that cable is nice and taut. I wrapped it around back there, around this a couple times, and then I let it hang. Okay? And so now I already have this side set up over here. So the next step is you're going to need something to measure millimeters. Okay, and so I'm going to try showing you what we're looking at here. So this obviously measures millimeters. These things are great. All different companies make these. These are Mr. Penn. No idea, but they're stainless steel hardened. Okay, and then the thought process is here is you're going to come over to the wheel. You're going to put this thing with your millimeter side, obviously starting at 0. to here. You're going to measure from the front of the wheel to the back of the wheel. Now this is the part you might have already seen on the Rush video, and it can be a little difficult, but right now you can see I'm at 54. I come back here and measure. I'm at 55. I've not already measured these, so what's that showing me is that my front is towed out by 1 millimeter. Again, I'm at 54 in the front. And again, I might not be holding the camera at the right angle to show you that 54, but that's what I'm seeing is 54. Okay, and then I've got 55 in the back. So now the theory would tell you that that means that the back wheel here is farther away from the cord. Okay, so that means that the front of the tire here is poking out. So that means that I am towed out 1 millimeter. Now I believe that Rush calls for it to be towed out 0.5, but I actually need to get my little cheat spec sheet out because I can never remember. But I think that the front is supposed to be towed out 0.5 and the back is supposed to be towed in for a little bit, but I'm going to pull the sheet up and I'll give you the specs. And okay, so now next what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the toe. Okay, so now the thought process is here, according to the Rush cheat sheet, which many of you may have seen this paper right here. Okay, this would be the specs that Rush basically sends you the car, or when you get a brand new car, this is exactly the way that it would be set up. So it shows you here your toe 0.5 millimeter out on the front and 0.25 millimeter in on the back. Now what the 0.5 millimeter out is doing is it's going to give you stabilization in the steering wheel at speed. What the 0.25 millimeter in on the back is going to do is it's going to keep the back end of the car stable and chasing behind the front. Okay, on even passenger cars on the road, they have the same toe in on the back, and the toe out in the front. You could definitely tell if you don't have it right. You'll be going down a straightaway 100+ miles an hour and the car will just be wandering. It'll seem super twitchy, and that's probably because you don't have your toe out set right. Okay, now in a perfect world you would want to have this car set on camber on plates. Okay, and if you've never seen plates before, my setup jig has them. Right, basically they're plates where you have a steel plate and it's on balls so it can rotate, and that way when you're changing camber, changing toe, everything is free, nothing is loaded up. But obviously here, I've done this many times, you can do it. It can be a little finicky, but you can definitely get it right. So the idea would be is when you're measuring your millimeters from the front of the wheel to the back of the wheel, all right, is you're looking to get 0.5 millimeter out in the front. So which basically is going to mean is when you're measuring it, your front measurement is going to become less than your back measurement by 0.5 millimeter. All right, so point blank, if I were to come over here and measure down on this, I'm going to try to get this direct here. So you could see right here that that is like 55 millimeter. Okay, and when I go to the front, I am 54 millimeter. Okay, so right now my measurement is 1 millimeter towed out, but now Rush says 0.5 millimeter towed out. So what I've got to do is I've got to get that little 0.5 millimeter adjustment, and it's going to be very finicky. Now one piece that I skipped here in the beginning is you're going to want to have something to hold the steering wheel straight. Now I actually don't, and I've aligned this car several times without it. You have to go back and forth from side to side and make sure that you're keeping the steering wheel straight, but there is a cheater mark right there that will tell you, that Rush puts there, that will tell you where the steering wheel is straight. So if you use that and then obviously stand behind the car, look at the top line of your steering wheel, you want to roll the car back and forth, forward and back again every time you bring it off the jacks, make sure everything is freed up. And I'm going to work on the front, and I'm going to get them both tightened down and get that 0.5 millimeter in. Right? When you're going to your tire rod ends, okay, what you're going to do is, here's your tire rod end. I've already loosened my nut up here, and I've already loosened my nut up here, so now I can just grab this with my hand, okay? Now it only takes the smallest little adjustment to change a lot. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna get it right on both sides to where I'm at that 0.5 millimeter, and then I'm gonna take those nuts and I'm gonna run them back in tight to your center adjuster, and then I'm going to push the car forward and backwards, make sure my steering wheel is nice and straight, and I'm going to measure them again. Once I get it to where I'm within reason, you know, as long as I'm within 3/4 of a degree or so, if I'm at a quarter, half, 3/4, somewhere in that range, I'm going to tighten it down. I'm going to call it. It's going to be fine, okay? And then I'm going to go to the back, and the back is supposed to be 0.25 in, and when I get back there, I'll show you that one. Okay, so I got the front toe set. Now I couldn't really do it on camera. It would have took forever because it's just time consuming. It's very finicky, it's a very fine adjustment, and when you're not on plates, which you can do it, you just have to take a little bit more time. And so I'll explain. I loosened up both sides, got them both set to where I thought I was good. I tightened the nuts up by hand to the shaft. So in other words, I tightened the nut up to the shaft by hand on both sides, okay? And then I sat here and rolled the car forward and backwards, turned the wheel left and right, forward and backwards, kept coming back and lining that little white dash up, okay, every time, and then kept remeasuring, kept having to readjust them until I got them both to where they were right on, tighten them down, roll the car, do the same thing again, make sure, and then I checked them again, and boom, voila, I was right on the money. Now, if you're ever off just a little bit, just make sure that you have your steering wheel. Maybe if you're off on both sides, but in different ways, maybe your steering wheel is just a little hair off. And again, that's where having a steering wheel holder will definitely help you a little bit, but still, without being on plates, it can be a little finicky to make sure you get that adjustment right. And you want to take your time and make sure you get that toe out that they want, because without that toe out, the car will feel very twitchy on the straightaways at higher speeds, say 90 plus. The car will just feel like it's wandering, and you're constantly correcting it, trying to drive straight, and it'll be very twitchy on turn in, and that's the characteristic of your wheels not being towed out properly. Okay, so now I've got it precisely right. So if I show you the measurements here, and I grab my string here, so I grab that there, I'm at 55. I grab this one right here, I'm at 54.5. So with that smaller 0.5 difference shows that this front is towards the string, that 0.5. So by being 54.5 right here, okay, and 55 in the back, shows that my front tire is a half a millimeter more towards the string than the back. When I come over here, it's gonna be the same thing. I'm gonna be 54, and this one is gonna be 53.5. Okay, and so there again is my half a millimeter, and that's what you're looking for. So now I'm just going to repeat the process in the back, and in the back again it's 0.25 in. So I'd say if you can get 0.25, half a millimeter in, either and anywhere in that range is going to be good. So I'm going to go ahead and measure them, get them adjusted, and then I'll show you where we're at and everything we had to do. All right, so now I'm going to go on to the back, and so I actually just measured, and how lucky am I? They're actually right on the money where they need to be. So I'm going to show you. Now remember, we want to be 0.25 toe in on the front. Now I would say anywhere between 0.25 and 0.5 would be acceptable, especially considering my situation of not being on roller plates. It's very hard to get these things that precise, and I assure you, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. But so what I've got right here, and I'm going to show it to you, is I've got, looks like 49.5, and when I come over here, I've got 50. Okay, so that would tell me again that my front distance is larger than my back distance, which means that the front is towed in. Okay, the front is towed in, and the back is more towards the string. So your bigger measurement should be in the front, opposite of what we did with the front. And so again, over here, looks like I am 46.5. Coming over here, looks like I am 46. So again, bigger numbers in the front, which means that the front distance between here and the string is greater, which means the tire is towed in and the back is out. Okay, so that means I'm probably in about 0.25 to 0.5. It's really close in that mixture on both sides. So they're right on the money, they're close enough. I'm not even gonna mess with them. They're both in the direction they need to be, and both within absolute reason. Now the fronts are all tightened down. So now one last thing we need to make sure we do is, I didn't have to touch the tire rods in the back, but I do need to get the paint marker out, and we need to paint mark and make sure we clean and repaint mark everything that we loosened up and tightened. The worst thing you do is when you get done with all this, you get to the track and you run a session, and then you go to check your paint markings and you realize you forgot to put them on, and now you don't know if they're tight or not. And that's somewhere where you don't want to be, because like we talked about before, anything with Loctite on it, obviously your tire rod ends don't have Loctite, but those upper control arm bolts that I did earlier have Loctite on them, fronts and rears. All right, and so if I have to put a Allen on them and give them an ooga and they move, I've essentially broken that Loctite free, and now that Loctite is not doing its job. I really need to extract that bolt, clean the threads off, re-Loctite it, put it back together, and truthfully it should sit for time to cure, which I believe Loctite's cure is 24 hours. Now you can go out and send it, not saying you can't. However, every session you run it, you want to keep a very close eye that day and just make sure that they're getting warm and curing and not moving, okay? And that's what the paint marker's for. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to put paint markers on these tie rod ends. I'm going to go right in this area here so it's easily visible on both sides. But what I need to do first is I need to make sure that I get all the old marks off, so that way it can't rotate to an old mark and make me think that it's tight when it really isn't. Then that pretty much wraps it up. After that, I'm just gonna take the string and wrap it all up, put everything away, and essentially the car is aligned and ready to go. I've already cleaned and lubricated everything. All I got to do is really just put the body back on, give it all a wipe down, and essentially I'm ready for my next track day, which might be Saturday if the event's sold out, if they decide to get me in. So I might be running Charlotte Motor Speedway on Saturday, and if I do, I'll definitely share some videos and hopefully have some fun. I have no idea what sprocket to put on. I know we're running the bus stop, but again, I'm not sure. I think there was 3 people in front of me and it's Saturday, so probably won't be running, but we'll see. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I know it's difficult when I was talking about the toe. Just remember, when you're talking about toe in or toe out, it might take you a minute to look at your tape measure, to look at your tool here, and just really think about it and make sure that you're getting it in the right direction. If you're trying to tow the front wheels out, then obviously your front measurement is going to be smaller and your back measurement is going to be further from the string. So just try to use the string as your basis point. Your first time doing this, it's going to be a little like you're going to be going back and just rechecking and making sure that you're doing it in the right direction. But I assure you that everything that I did here today is super easy. My camber gauge is expensive. Those things are a couple $100. They probably have a cheaper one that you could get than that one, and they have ones that are way more expensive than that. But obviously these tow bars are something that Rush provides. The string, I mean, I don't know, I probably paid $20 a piece for those strings. If you know anybody who's in a construction trade, they probably have some pop line. You could probably use that if you wanted to. You could use basic fishing line you could buy in a store. It doesn't even need to be in a wrapped up thing like those yellow things that I have back there. Doesn't even need to be in anything like that. So just whatever works for you. Biggest thing is, don't be scared of it. It's not rocket science. It's relatively simple. Keep rotating the car forward and backwards as you're doing it to make sure that it's getting back to zero. Go to the front and bounce the car up and down, front and rear. All of that will help you make sure that you get this thing set up right. And at the end of the day, you'll feel a whole lot more rewarding that you did it yourself rather than paying somebody else to do it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll do some more videos here soon. Thanks.